Rockaways Productions presents The Casey Waters Show, episode 481, The Family. Hello, I'm your host, Casey Waters. Today, I will continue with Pricing the Priceless by Paula Diperna. Here, the author looks at putting a price on various natural resources, such as the air we breathe, coral reefs, forests, and other natural resources. By treating these resources as an asset, perhaps we could learn how to better manage them to reduce climate change. Later on in the show, it's the family. Here, I look at how we fit in with the rest of society and how everyone else, is a lot like us. And so hence, in a sense, we are one big family. Today's show will feature background footage from Mountains to Sea Trail along the Blue Ridge Parkway. I hiked in 2 locations due to some rain in the area. First, I hiked on Mountains to Sea Trail North, heading out from Walker Knob Overlook. Walker Knob Overlook is about 5 miles past Craggy Gardens, to the north of Craggy Gardens. It's not much of an overlook, more of a pull-off, for it is surrounded by trees. Then I also hiked the trail going to Rattlesnake Lodge. This also includes a portion of the Mountains to Sea Trail, at least on this hike. Here, you take the Blue Ridge Parkway heading north from Asheville, North Carolina, and you park just before the first tunnel. The trail goes off to the left, on the left side of the parkway. However, the trail splits. Stay to the left to go to the remnants of Rattlesnake Lodge. So now, let's continue with Pricing the Priceless by Paula Diperna. Ireland presents a vivid case. A developed country in the European Union with an environmental leadership profile squeezed between best intentions and complex imperatives. Though representing just 1/20th of a percent of Earth's land surface, Ireland hosts nearly 3% of Earth's blanket bog. The peatland type found at shorelines and in uplands, and about half of the EU's raised bog, a peatland type found more midland. Peatlands once covered nearly 17% of Ireland, but gradually bogs were drained for planting or cut and dried into fuel blocks. Literally, the energy of rural Irish village life. According to the GPA, as of 2022, 50% of Europe's peatlands degraded in one way or another, mostly for agriculture. And this makes Europe the second largest current greenhouse gas emitter from drained peatlands at close to 600 metric tons of CO2 per year. For perspective, this total just about equals the annual emissions of Germany, or the combined emissions of France and the UK, meaning emissions released from degrading peatlands could wipe out any near-term emissions reductions these nations might make. Now, let's go to page 218 of Pricing the Priceless by Paula Diperna. Gabon, with 2 million people and a territory that occupies 18% of the Congo River Basin, has attempted to avoid being sucked into the consumption sink trap by emphasizing forest protection as a moneymaker. As of 2022, the nation maintained one of the lowest rates of deforestation in the world. Its conservation-minded second president, Omar Bongo, who took office in 1967, established an extensive system of national parks and reserves, and his son, who followed his father in office, imposed a ban on export of raw logs in 2010. Now, let's go to page 224 of Pricing the Priceless by Paula Diperna. If conventional capital market accounting does not shift soon enough to confer sufficient value on natural assets left alone, or at sufficient scale, what is the remedy for holders of those assets? A highest bidder always tends to appear. Minister Yves Bazeba of the DRC crystallized the inescapable when she spoke in November 2022 about oil concessions in the DRC competing with peatland protections, saying, if the world wants Congo to preserve the peatlands, where is the compensation? That's a question of ethics and morals. Her remarks recalled provocative comments I heard at the 1992 UN Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, when an energetic Brazilian activist posed a pointed question at a citizens' forum outside the official government meetings to a crowd gathered under a sweltering tent. She confidently asserted, if the North says it's so important for us to keep our rainforest standing, why don't they just rent it from us? We can only wonder with regret how far along the world would be in wrestling runaway greenhouse emissions as well as socio-economic progress in Amazonian countries if major emitting nations then had calculated and willingly paid such rent. In fact, according to WRI, the future of the Amazon as a net carbon sink fell into doubt due to high rates of deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon, the bulk of Latin America's Amazonia. Brazil's Amazon region metamorphosed from a net absorber of CO2 to a net emitter from roughly 1980 to 2020, with extremely high rates when Jair Bolsonaro was president from 2019 to 2022. He resented measures to protect the Amazon, and according to INPE, the National Space Agency of Brazil, deforestation increased 9.5% in 2020 alone, the most since 2015, meaning an area 7 times the size of the City of London have been lost just 1 year of Bolsonaro's tenure. Now it is time for the family. Here, I look at ourselves and how we fit in to society and how everyone else is a lot like us. Hence, in a sense, we're one big family. Let's dive in. Well, of course, there's always adverse situations that we must deal with. Some of them are temporary and, well, might affect the filming situation here, such as the finches behind me, or behind the camera rather. The finches are behind the camera. They are covered, but they still might chirp. And then I got a cat. I got Ambrosia with me, who's purring. Perhaps that will be picked up by the mic. And of course, there's other things I'm dealing with, personal situations, and other things, well, we're all dealing with. Some of these problems are temporary, and some of them will last a bit longer, perhaps almost becoming permanent. Well, at least as far as their lives go. Some problems might occupy a large portion of our life. Some problems might only last a few minutes. Everything's different. But when you deal with your problems, whether they're a short-term problem or a long-term problem, often we turn to prayer. We could pray that things will improve, and often they do. So, there is some power to prayer, because prayer is often effective, particularly when you tell everyone about it. See, that's the condition of the prayer. You have to make a bargain with God. If God grants your wish that you are praying for, well, then you gotta testify. You gotta let people know what happened. The adverse situation, the prayer, and how things improved because of the prayer. Was sure it happened with me. My partner had a high PSA rating, perhaps indicating prostate cancer. He's been through enough already, gee. I prayed for him. I prayed for a negative cancer result. When I say negative, I mean negative enough that he doesn't even need a biopsy or anything. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. The results were clearly negative. No biopsy was needed. My partner Well, God shone on him favorably. God answered my prayer. And so thus I tell you. And thus you should tell other people when your prayers are answered. And so on and so on. We mustn't forget the power of prayer, especially in adverse conditions, whether it's a short term adverse condition or something more long term. What about the family? Yeah, well, that's what this section is about. Well, we have our family, right? Our parents, our siblings, our cousins, our aunts and uncles, and so forth. But I'm talking about a bigger family. I'm talking about everyone on the planet being part of your family. Is it possible? Well, of course it is. And in a sense, it's really true. Well, on a couple levels I could think of. First, you have to look at the genetics. And, well, we all perhaps sprung from a single ancestor, or maybe a small group of ancestors. Perhaps they might even been scattered around different parts of the planet, with humankind developing simultaneously in different areas. I'm not sure. Perhaps humankind arose in one area and then migrated outward. But whatever the case, there was a big bottleneck, a severe population decline of humankind. I guess this might have been like 700,000 years ago, something like that. And we were reduced to a population of perhaps just a couple of thousand individuals, maybe even less. And then somehow we came back. So we have those people, those thousand or so individuals, as our ancestors. We all share in common. And hence, we're all related. And because we're all related to them, sure, we're all one big family. But that's just one way of seeing it. We're also one big family, well, in the metaphysical sense of things. Sure. So, we have to look at us. We have to realize that our life is impermanent. We're only here, we're only alive for, well, anywhere from perhaps a few minutes or days in the case of infant mortality, to perhaps 100 years or so if we really live a long life. But we're only here for so long. What lies beyond it? Is there something more permanent? Something more permanent about us, perhaps, that goes beyond our life? Well, I guess there is. Sure. We have to look at this. For we can't really claim ourselves as an individual, even though we might really try. It's hard to cut us off, so to speak, from the rest of the world. We are too darn interconnected to the rest of the world physically, and of course mentally and culturally too, and of course to each other. If we isolate ourselves as an individual and try to define who we are, well, soon we might realize it's getting difficult to define us without talking about our parents or our siblings or our job or our education. Almost anything in our experience involves other people. Almost all significant events in our life involve other people. So it's hard to just cut those other people out and define us as an individual. We are defined in relation to everyone else. We are part of them, and they are part of us. We're all one big family. Sure. So we have to think about that. In a sense, everyone else is you, or at least part of you, and you are everyone else. Part of everyone is in you, just like part of you is in everyone else. We're all interconnected. And we all come from the same structure, fundamentally. Our consciousness, I guess, is what I'm talking about here. We're all conscious. We're all aware. We all must take care of ourselves and cooperate with others. We often have similar stories in the sense that we might undergo similar structures. Similar struggles, rather. Sure. In the sense that we often need people to help us to get through. But let's look at consciousness in a little more detail. 4. If you look at quantum physics and the properties of quantum physics, well, you will discover that consciousness is even more fundamental than time or space. In a sense, time and space are created by consciousness. So everything is just a quantum blur until we look at it. And then all the electrons and atoms settle into one position and form the reality that's around us. But if we looked away, would the reality disappear? Well, I guess if all sentient beings looked away and no one saw it, perhaps it would at least disappear temporarily until some sentient being looked at it again and it rematerialized. This could be any object, even a very large one, such as the moon. Now, of course, this is all theory, but the evidence from observations and the math kind of point towards that direction. That reality, in a sense, is created by our consciousness, by our perception. So our consciousness, in a sense, is more fundamental than time or space. Sure, because we create it. Well, if that's the case, then what's really going on here? Yeah, things are getting a little crazy now. For I'm saying we're creating time and space. Well, if we're creating it, what's there when we're not creating it? Is it just a quantum blur? Well, I guess it's hard to say, but perhaps that's really the case. Everything's just a quantum blur. atoms and virtual particles popping in and out of existence, out of the vacuum. And then, when we look, the particles and the atoms all settle in to one defined form or several defined forms to make up what we see. And when we turn away, and everyone else turns away, and no sentient being sees it, perhaps it disappears. In a sense, we are in some sort of virtual reality created by our consciousness. So, our perception, well, it brings about the things that are around us and we interact with. Well, I guess that's all very interesting, but why? I mean, it just seems kind of artificial. If reality is not real, if it's simply created by our perceiving it, then what is real? Is there some sort of ultimate reality? Well, sure there is. But what is it? Well, perhaps by thinking about this situation, we might get a little closer. For if we're in a virtual reality type setup, if we're creating reality with our consciousness, and in a sense we're like living in the Matrix or something like that, we're our reality is almost like a dream. Sure. But why are we going through all this? What's the purpose of it? Reality not even being real, but simply created by our perception.
Casey Waters Show. Producer, Casey Waters. Graphic editing, Judson Laird. Please note our new email address, CaseyWaters2 @CaseyWaters.com.